Las Vegas just made a $1.5 billion bet against nature. And if they lose, the city goes dark. Right now, 2.3 million people live in a place where rain almost never falls. A mere 4 inches a year while battling summer temperatures that crack 115 degrees. No rivers, no aquifers, nothing. Every shower, every flushed toilet, every pool and fountain on the Strip depends on a single lake. And that lake has been draining for over 20 years. By 2022, Las Vegas was staring at a countdown. Not to water restrictions, not to conservation measures, but to the complete loss of its water supply. The intake pipes that had kept the city alive for decades were about to start sucking air. So they did something that had never been attempted anywhere on Earth. They drilled a tunnel 3 miles through solid rock, beneath the floor of the reservoir itself, to reach water so deep that no drought in recorded history has ever touched it. They called it the third straw, and it took 7 years. It cost more than the original Hoover Dam adjusted for inflation. And when they finished, engineers celebrated the deepest municipal water intake ever constructed. But here's what they didn't tell you. The lake is still shrinking. The tunnel only reaches so far. And 40 million people across 7 states are all fighting over the same disappearing river. So the real question isn't whether Las Vegas solved its problem. It's whether they just drilled the most expensive hole in American history into a crisis that has no solution. To understand how we got here, you need to understand something fundamental about this place. Las Vegas broke every rule of geography. The Mojave Desert is one of the most hostile environments on the North American continent. Annual rainfall barely reaches 4 inches. Summer heat doesn't just climb past 100 degrees. It sits there, relentless, day after day, week after week. The ground is ancient and cracked. The air pulls moisture from anything it touches. There are no rivers running through the valley floor. No natural lakes anywhere within reach. The aquifers beneath the surface are too small and too deep to sustain anything resembling a major city. By every metric that determines where human civilizations can thrive, this land should have stayed what it was for thousands of years. Empty. Silent. A place you pass through on your way to somewhere else. In 1940, that's exactly what Las Vegas was. A railroad stop, maybe 8,000 people. Dusty streets, cheap motels, forgettable in every way. Nobody predicted what would happen next. The casinos arrived first. Then the highways connecting Los Angeles to the rest of the country. Then, air conditioning transformed the brutal summers from deadly to merely uncomfortable. And suddenly, the population didn't just grow, it detonated. By the 1970s, Las Vegas was expanding faster than almost anywhere in America. By the 1990s, it had become one of the fastest-growing metropolitan areas in the Western Hemisphere. Today, over 2.3 million people call it home. Another 40 million tourists flood in every single year, expecting ice in their drinks, water in their pools, and fountains dancing outside their hotel windows. Every single one of them needs water. The city consumes close to 100 billion gallons annually. Picture enough liquid to bury all of Manhattan under 3 feet of water, and you'd need to do it every single year just to match what Las Vegas uses. And nearly 90% of that supply flows from one source: Lake Mead. The reservoir was born when Hoover Dam plugged the Colorado River back in the 1930s. Engineers believed they had conquered nature, tamed a wild river, built a permanent oasis that would supply the desert Southwest for generations. They had no idea what was coming. The agreement that divided the Colorado River among 7 western states was signed in 1922. Negotiators studied flow measurements from the previous 2 decades and calculated how much water the river could reliably provide. What they didn't understand was that those years represented an anomaly. Some of the wettest conditions the region had experienced in centuries. They measured a river running unusually full and assumed that abundance was normal. It wasn't. The compact promised more water than the Colorado actually delivers in most years. And for 100 years, that miscalculation has been compounding silently, like debt accruing interest that nobody wants to acknowledge. Las Vegas inherited a water future built on math that doesn't work. A city that keeps expanding. A river that keeps diminishing. A single reservoir standing between millions of people and catastrophe. And the reservoir was already starting to empty. Water engineers measure everything in elevation, feet above sea level. That single number determines whether infrastructure functions or fails. When Las Vegas first tapped Lake Mead in 1971, they constructed an intake pipe at 1,050 feet elevation. The lake was full then. The river was flowing strong. The notion that water levels could ever drop far enough to threaten that pipe seemed like paranoid fantasy. By the early 1990s, population growth had outpaced the system's capacity. Engineers installed a second intake, positioned lower at roughly 1,000 feet. Redundancy, insurance, prudent planning for an uncertain future. Both pipes were designed for a world where Lake Mead remained reasonably healthy, where the Colorado River kept delivering what old agreements had promised. That world started dying in the early 2000s. There's a number that haunts everyone responsible for keeping Las Vegas alive: 895 feet. That's dead pool, the elevation at which water physically cannot flow through Hoover Dam anymore. Below that line, both original intakes become useless. The pipes still exist, the pumps still work, but they'd be reaching for water that sits beneath their openings, completely beyond grasp. By summer 2022, the lake had crashed to approximately 1,040 feet, its lowest point since the reservoir was first filled in the 1930s. A white bathtub ring of mineral deposits scarred the canyon walls, climbing hundreds of feet toward where the waterline used to be. The first intake was already compromised. Projections showed the decline accelerating, not stabilizing. Inside the Water Authority, engineers faced arithmetic that offered no comfort. At the rate the lake was dropping, they had years before the system failed entirely. Not decades, years. Something had to reach deeper than anyone had ever attempted. The question was whether it was even possible. Here's where the story becomes almost difficult to believe. Engineers proposed boring a tunnel 3 miles long through solid bedrock, passing directly beneath the floor of one of the largest reservoirs on the planet. At the far end, they would anchor an intake structure to the lake bottom at 860 feet elevation, below dead pool, below anything the existing pipes could access, deeper than any municipal water intake ever constructed in American history. The challenges were immense. Crews would be drilling through rock formations hundreds of feet beneath 247 square miles of water. Pressure at those depths could crush equipment designed for conventional tunneling. The slightest miscalculation could flood the bore or collapse it entirely. Construction started in 2008. A tunnel boring machine 24 feet in diameter, weighing hundreds of tons, began grinding forward from a vertical shaft on Saddle Island near the center of the lake. Progress was measured in feet per day, sometimes inches. Workers rotated through around the clock, pushing through fault zones and unstable formations that threatened to give way without warning. Water infiltrated through fractures in the rock. Temperatures inside the tunnel climbed toward the edge of what humans can safely endure. The original timeline called for completion in a few years. It stretched to nearly 7. In December 2014, the tunnel boring machine finally punched through into the intake structure that had been lowered to the lake floor and anchored with over 1,000 truckloads of concrete. The connection was precise. Workers hit their target within centimeters of where calculations said it should be. By September 2015, water began flowing through the completed tunnel. A concrete-lined tube 20 feet in diameter, large enough for a subway train, running 3 miles beneath one of Earth's largest man-made reservoirs. The Water Authority later added a specialized pumping station engineered to keep drawing water even if the lake dropped below thresholds where standard equipment would fail. Total investment climbed past $1.5 billion. Las Vegas had just completed the most audacious municipal water project in American history. And the lake kept draining anyway. This is the part that doesn't fit neatly into a triumph narrative. Engineering solved the immediate crisis. It secured access to water at depths the previous system couldn't touch. But engineering cannot solve a math problem this fundamental. A city consuming nearly 100 billion gallons annually. A lake that loses more to evaporation and downstream obligations than it receives from the river most years. A climate growing hotter and drier with each passing decade. No tunnel, no matter how deep, can outrun those realities forever. So Las Vegas did something else, something that might ultimately matter more than any tunnel ever could. They rewired the culture. Since 2002, per capita water consumption in Las Vegas has plummeted by more than 50%. Not despite population growth, but during it. The valley added over 800,000 new residents across that span, while still using billions fewer gallons annually than it did 2 decades earlier. That represents one of the most dramatic conservation reversals ever documented in any American city. The mechanics are deliberate and sweeping. Indoor water gets recycled at rates approaching 99%. Treated wastewater flows back into Lake Mead, earning the city return credits against its Colorado River allocation. Every gallon that goes down a drain indoors and returns to the system effectively counts twice. No other major metropolitan area in the country replicates this at comparable scale. But the real fight happened outside. In 2021, Nevada became the first state to permanently outlaw ornamental grass. Not lawns where families gather, but the decorative turf blanketing office parks, lining street medians, covering commercial properties where no one ever sets foot. That grass demands 4 times more water than desert landscaping while serving no purpose beyond appearance. The removal program targets roughly 6 square miles of non-functional turf across the valley. Officials project it will conserve around 9 billion gallons every year once complete, enough to supply tens of thousands of additional homes. Since the late 1990s, rebate programs have paid property owners to tear out grass and install drought-tolerant alternatives. Over 250 million square feet of lawn has been stripped away. Cumulative savings have topped 200 billion gallons. New housing developments can no longer plant grass in front yards. New golf courses cannot draw from the Colorado River. Commercial buildings cannot install evaporative cooling systems that consume water and vent it into the atmosphere. Las Vegas examined the math, recognized what survival required, and systematically changed almost everything that could be changed. Then something happened that nobody predicted. The winter of 2022 to 2023 delivered extraordinary snowpack across the Rocky Mountains. Monitoring stations throughout the upper Colorado Basin recorded accumulations far beyond seasonal averages. When spring arrived, that snow melted gradually, feeding streams and tributaries that eventually drained toward Lake Powell and Lake Mead. Both reservoirs climbed. Lake Mead rose more than 20 feet in a single year. Lake Powell, sitting upstream, gained over 50 feet. Federal projections that had charted continued catastrophic decline were abandoned and rebuilt from scratch. By late 2024, water levels had recovered roughly 16 feet from their 2022 lows. It felt like rescue. It looked like the crisis might be ending. Scientists urged everyone to slow down. One exceptional winter, they cautioned, cannot undo 2 decades of structural deficit. Even with the rebound, Lake Mead remained over 160 feet below full capacity. The improvement was genuine. It was also fragile, dependent entirely on weather patterns that climate projections suggest will grow increasingly rare. The third straw was designed precisely for this kind of uncertainty, for the seasons when snowpack fails to materialize, when the river delivers less than everyone needs. When the models predicting decline turn out to be accurate, it was built for the next time. And the next time is coming. Paleoclimate research reveals what the modern record cannot show. Scientists examining tree rings and ancient sediments have documented that the Colorado River Basin has endured mega droughts stretching not years but decades. Conditions far harsher and far longer than anything captured since formal measurements began. The 20-year dry spell that drained Lake Mead to barely a quarter of its capacity might not have been an outlier. It might have been standard behavior for this landscape on longer timescales. And deep in the lakebed, another problem is quietly emerging. As water levels swing dramatically up and down, sediments that rested undisturbed for generations are getting churned loose. Those sediments contain heavy metals and industrial residues from decades of mining and manufacturing along the shoreline. Contaminants that were considered safely buried while submerged and stable. The third straw guarantees access to water. It offers no guarantees about the quality of what flows through it, however. 40 million people across 7 states rely on the Colorado River to survive. The farms that grow the nation's produce, the cities that power the economy, the remaining ecosystems clinging to existence along the riverbanks. Las Vegas constructed the deepest and most expensive municipal intake in American history, pioneered conservation programs that other cities have barely started imitating, rewrote laws, redesigned landscapes, reshaped behavior at a scale rarely achieved anywhere, and still cannot guarantee its own survival through another extended drought. The 2026 renegotiation of the Colorado River Compact hangs over everything. The original 1922 agreement is expiring. 7 states must somehow agree on dividing a resource that no longer delivers what century-old assumptions promised. California, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, New Mexico, plus Mexico, plus tribal nations whose water rights were essentially ignored the first time these decisions were made. The negotiations are brutal. The math is pitiless. Uses across the basin still exceed sustainable supply by millions of acre-feet every year. Some agricultural operations have already watched their allocations vanish. Some cities have voluntarily surrendered water they had legal rights to withdraw. Federal money has flowed to anyone willing to leave more in the system than they extract. None of it has fundamentally altered the equation. Las Vegas occupies the sharpest edge of this crisis because alternatives don't exist. Phoenix can pump groundwater when the river disappoints. Los Angeles pulls from multiple sources scattered across California. Las Vegas has Lake Mead, nothing else. Every dollar spent, every law passed, every foot of tunnel bored through solid rock leads back to that single body of water. A reservoir that nature has been trying to reclaim for over 2 decades. The tunnel is complete, water still flows through it. Conservation programs keep expanding. But beneath that shrinking blue surface, the countdown never stopped. The desert has patience that humans cannot match. It has been here for millions of years. It will remain long after the last fountain stops dancing on the strip. Las Vegas placed its bet, drilled its tunnel, transformed its relationship with water at a pace and scale that seemed impossible. Now everything depends on a single question. Is it enough? Or did the desert already know the answer? What do you think? Is Las Vegas proving that cities can adapt to anything? Or is it showing us that some places were never meant to hold millions of people? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to understand the forces quietly reshaping our world, make sure you subscribe. There's a lot more coming.